Welcome back to Stormi Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Paris on my Girls Rock Productions channel. In week 4's episode, we will be visiting a castle where a lady was locked up in a tower, a Parisian gem that looks into the relationship between man and beast, a stunning Gothic chapel with a long and fascinating history, and one of the oldest and most beautiful squares in all of France, Chateau de Puymartin, le Musée de la Chasse et de la Tour, le Sainte Chapelle, and la Place de Vosges. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Now, let's start with the castle that looks like it was plucked right out of a fairy tale, Chateau de Puymartin. The castle of Puymartin is an impressive fortress that was inhabited for 5 centuries by the same family. And for those same 5 centuries, it has also been associated with one of the most famous legends in the Black Périgord. Chateau de Puymartin dates all the way back to the 13th century, around 1269. It was gifted in Fife by the abbot of Sainte to the Surveillant family in 1271. It was built on the border of France and England when the 100 Years' War broke out in the Périgord. There would be a 2-year truce between Jean le Bon and his cousin Edward III of England after his defeat at the Battle of Poitiers, but it would come to an end in 1356. This is when the English would start pillaging, sacking, and robbing areas in the Périgord, especially in Sainte, due to the fact that France had no real king. These English mercenaries would storm the Puymartin, and it would fall on January 8, 1357. These mercenaries would destroy the castle, tearing up the roofs and destroying the floors. It was actually left in ruins for most of the 100 Years' War. In 1450, Randolph de St. Clair took over the castle, planning its reconstructions and extension. Over the next few generations, there were a lot of conflicts amongst the lordship of Wilmington and Camargue, due in large to Camargue claiming they owned the property. The reconstruction of Wilmington was meant to fight against the Lord of Baynac, who was the owner of Camargue at the time. In the 16th century, Raymond de St. Clair, the grandson of Randolph, was the leader of the Catholics in the Black Périgord, and he would establish his headquarters at Wilmington. Under the lead of the dreaded warlord Turenne, Raymond would drive out the Huguenots, who were a Protestant group in France during the War of Religions, and he would drive them out of Sainte. When the French Revolution broke out, Puymartin would belong to the Marquis François Rafnac de Carbonnier de Marzac. Sorry, my French is not the best for attempting these pronunciations, though. The Marquis would manage to keep the castle, as well as 3 other castles he owned throughout the war. In the late 19th century, the owner, Marquis Marc Rafnac de Carbonnier de Marzac, would only have 1 daughter, despite putting 1 million gold francs into renovations of the castle. It would be passed down to his daughter, who would marry Count Jacques de Montblanc in 1920. It is still in the Montblanc family to this day. This has actually been the same family for over 5 centuries, names only changing due to marriage. St. Clair, La Plenier, Rafnac de Marzac, Carbonnier de Marzac, and now Gerard de Montblanc. With such a long, dark history, it's not surprising that this castle is home to one of France's greatest legends, Dame Blanche de Chateau de Puymartin. The Dame Blanche, or White Lady of Chateau de Puymartin, is said to be the spirit of Thérèse de St. Clair, the wife of Jean de St. Clair, who was the lord of Chateau de Puymartin in the 1500s. Now, her exact name is not known, and some people do believe she was actually the wife of Raymond de St. Clair, and both stories fit the timeline in their own way. Either way, the story goes that the lord of the castle was away at war, and while he was gone, his wife had taken in a lover. The affair wouldn't stay secret for long, as the lord would pretend to still be in battle, but would return home to his wife and castle. He was hoping for a warm hero's welcome, but what he found was his wife in another man's arms. The Lord would go into a jealous rage, killing the lover instantly. As for his wife, her death would be much slower and more torturous. He would imprison her in a tower of the Chateau, because he could no longer trust her, and their marriage was, for all intents and purposes, over. For 15 years, the wife would be trapped in this tower. Legend has it that the door was actually bricked up with only enough space to put her food through while she was still alive. She was stripped of all the luxuries she had as the mistress of the house, and now all she had left was a barren mattress in the corner and a barred-up window. Her husband never pitied her, and his anger never lifted. It is rumored that after she died, they just filled in the hole and buried her in the walls of the castle. Because she was never given a proper burial, her spirit is still present in the castle today. At least now she is free to roam outside the tower, though. People claim to see her mostly on the stairs, in her room, and wandering the pathways of the gardens. Now, let's leave the princess who never made it out of her tower and head over to a stunning 17th century building that was owned by the Duke of Guangga before it was acquired by the French government. Le Musée de la Chasse et de la Nature. Le Musée de la Chasse et de la Nature is considered a Parisian gem. It is a museum dedicated to the relationship between humans and animals. The exhibits are thematically arranged to bring people on a journey through the evolution of topics like hunting, taxidermy, and representations of animals in art. The Museum of Hunt and Nature is housed in the Hôtel de Guangga, which was built back in the 17th century between 1651 and 1655, and designed by the architect François Mansart. It was built for Jean-François de Guangga de Brosset. The building would be acquired by Jean Roman in 1703, who would greatly embellish the interiors over the following year. It fell into disrepair and would be divided up into apartments during the late 19th century. It would finally be acquired by the government of Paris in 1961, and the museum would open up in 1964. Now, the most famous ghost in the Musée de la Chasse et de la Nature is believed to be that of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the famous philosopher and nature lover. Rousseau was a famous figure in the 18th century France. He was known for his works in politics, education, and nature of humanity. Visitors to the museum claim to see a man who looks like Jean-Jacques Rousseau admiring the exhibits. There is also a story of visitors down in the basement hearing what sounded like whispers from unseen voices, and the temperature in the room would drop. They tried to leave the room, but the door was stuck. It wouldn't be until several minutes later that they would finally be able to pull the door open and leave. From the castle that may have inspired Rapunzel to the museum haunted by a nature-loving politician. Next, we are going to head to a 13th century chapel that was built by King Louis IX, Sainte Chapelle. The Sainte Chapelle was built in the middle of the 13th century by Saint Louis, or King Louis IX, and it was built to house some of the most iconic Catholic relics, including the crown of thorns and a fragment of the true cross. King Louis IX would become Saint Louis throughout the course of his life and was canonized by the Catholic Church in 1297, about 27 years after his death. He would be the Capetian King of France from 1226 to his death in 1270, 43 years later. Saint Louis' sister, Isabella of France, was also a very important figure to the construction and the history of the chapel. She is actually considered a saint in her own right by some of the French though never canonized by the Catholic Church. It would take less than 7 years to build this chapel, which is crazy considering it was built entirely by hand. Believed to be designed by Pierre de Montreuil, one of the most prominent architects of his time. It is a true example of the Gothic style with its buttresses and beautiful stained glass windows, depicting stories from the Old and New Testament as well as those of the saints. The chapel was divided into 2 levels. The lower level was used as a parish for the public, and the upper level was a private worship area for the king and his court. The building was damaged during the French Revolution, and the former Puymartin Chapel would become a laboratory for the restoration of the historical monuments in the 19th century. This beautiful chapel is said to be haunted by a knight. There are many versions of this legend, but the most common story is that this is the ghost of a crusader who died in the Holy War. His body was then brought back to Paris to be buried inside Sainte-Chapelle. He is said to be restless, still wandering the chapel at night in his armor and carrying his sword, searching for peace. Another famous story is that of the Russian tourists who were visiting the chapel. They were supposedly approached by a woman who was dressed in old-fashioned clothing and spoke to them in French. The visitors were amazed at how well she spoke French, and they asked her where she was from. She answered that she was from Russia, and when they asked her about her fluent French, she stated that she had lived in France for a long time. When the visitors tried to ask her her name, she simply smiled and disappeared. Later on, the tourists would ask the staff about the young woman, only to find that there was no one working there matching her description. Many people believe this is Isabel of France returning to the chapel she loved so much. From the beautiful castle in the forest, to the museum that celebrates the evolution of humanity and animals, to the Gothic chapel that houses the crown of thorns, our final destination in this video is going to be a square built by King Henry IV to show his power and wealth. La Place des Vosges. The Place des Vosges is located right in the middle of Le Marais district in Paris, and the site is home to a long dark history that leads to many of the legends of ghosts we hear today. The square itself is known as the oldest public square in all of Paris. It was created back in 1604 by King Henry IV as the royal pavilion at the southern end of the square. It was designed by Baptiste du Cerceau. Henry IV would then even have all the other 35 buildings surrounding the square built in the same style. This was the first example of urban planning. The King's Pavilion was at the center of the southern side of the square, and the Queen's Pavilion would mirror it on the northern side. This square was inaugurated as Place Royale, and since it was merely a lawn at the time, it was a favorite spot for duels. Now, before the 17th century, Place des Vosges was the site of a magnificent building on the north end of the square, l'Hôtel des Tournelles. This grand building was constructed back in 1388, and it served as the royal residence all the way up until 1559. That was the year that King Henry II was severely wounded in a joust held on the lawn. He would die from his wounds 10 days later. In her grief, his wife, Catherine de' Medici, would have the building demolished, moving herself and the royal family into the Louvre. In 1639, Cardinal Richelieu had a bronze equestrian statue erected of King Louis XIII at the center of the square. The horse for the statue was originally created in 1567 to be used for a Henry II statue that was never finished. The statue of King Louis XIII, placed in the horse, didn't quite fit correctly. This statue was destroyed in the French Revolution. The statue that is seen in the square today is a statue of King Louis XII that was installed in 1825. The square was also a prominent site during the French Revolution. Many executions were held here, including that of Charles Corday, who assassinated the radical journalist Jean-Paul Marat. The square was renamed by Napoleon in 1800 to show gratitude towards the Vosges department, the first department to pay taxes. It would be changed back to Place Royale in 1815, but was then changed again to Place des Vosges in 1870. With such a long and colorful history, it's no wonder that the beautiful square is rumored to be haunted. Some say the hauntings go all the way back to the fateful jousting accident in 1559. Others say the spirits are those of the people who were executed during the French Revolution. The most famous ghost of Place des Vosges is that of Charlotte Corday herself. They say that she appears on the anniversary of her death in the white dress in which she was executed. She is said to walk through the square, disappearing near the spot on which she was executed. Another report that is well known is that of a group of tourists who were visiting the square late at night. They were walking through the gardens when suddenly they heard the sound of hooves on the pavement. They turned around to see a ghostly figure riding his horse through the square, only to disappear as quickly as he appeared. Could this be King Henri II preparing for his final joust? Today, Place des Vosges is the beautiful square that is the center for shopping, restaurants, and museums, celebrating its rich cultural history. Well, that concludes week 5 of Stormi Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Paris. I hope you enjoyed hearing more of the darkest stories the City of Love has to offer. From a castle that became a lady's personal tomb to a museum dedicated to educate on animals' roles in society. From a chapel built by Saint Louis and still visited by Isabelle of France, to a square where King Henri II is still replaying his final joust. Remember to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to check out some of my other playlists while you are here. On Stormi Teaches Music, I release a cover video on Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern, and a video of me teaching the song covered on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. You can catch the live stream on the lesson on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on my Patreon. On the Stormi Does Art playlist, I have some partial videos of the live stream you can get on my Patreon for the gold tier or higher. These streams are daily at 1 p.m. Eastern, and there is a link to my Patreon in the description box below, as well as the comments. Finally, check out Stormi Talks True Crime for some of the most heinous crimes in history. New videos are posted Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. For anyone who wants to make a one-time donation to the channel to help keep it running while I'm building my audience, there is the QR code to my Venmo and CashApp on the screen. There is also a link to both in the description box below, as well as the comments. If you are ever in the Wilmington, North Carolina area, sign up for the Wilmington Ghosts Walking Tours or the Wilmington Spirits and Spirits Pub Crawl with U.S. Ghost Adventures. You can have me or one of our other talented guides show you around our historic downtown and hear some of the darkest stories the beautiful city on the beach has to offer. While you are visiting, if you decide you want to stay or buy a vacation home, check out my Moving to Coastal Carolina channel and contact me, as I am a licensed realtor in the southeastern North Carolina area. Tune in next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the next video on Stormi Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Paris. Until then, have a great week and stay safe.